Hello and welcome to the Executive Series by Hardy Business School. This is where we sit down with top industry leaders and corporate executives just to glean a little bit of insights from their experience. And this morning we are speaking with Mr. Tayo Osiyemi, the Executive Director at SKLD Integrated Services. Now they are garments manufacturers, and in recent years they have diversified into so many other things, including fashion and many others. But he will tell us more about that. So good morning, sir, and welcome to the Executive Series.
Thank you for having me, Anome.
Amazing.
Glad to be here.
I'm glad. We're glad to have you. We're really glad to have you. So maybe we can start off easy, right? You have been at SKLD for 12 years, and in that time, SKLD has seen an over 30% CAGR. I'm sorry, I have to go there. It's impressive. It's really, really impressive.
Thank you.
So can you tell us just a little bit about how your journey has been here? So you didn't start this company, but you have been able to take it as your own and grow it so massively. So what does it look like? How did it look like coming in, and maybe just a little bit of your story over the last 12 years?
All right, thanks a lot for that question. A decent opening question, if you ask me. So my background, from my undergrad days was chemical engineering. And I stepped out of school hoping to get into the oil and gas industry like many people who studied my course. And that didn't work out, but I had the privilege of starting my career in management consulting, and I think that was the best thing that happened to my career because it was re-education for me, right? So my first 2 years were spent in management consulting, and we worked with a number of industries, especially financial services industry, and then a bit of manufacturing. So fast forward to when I joined SKLD in 2013. By that time, I had, of course, tried my hands on a number of other roles in other organizations. I had worked, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, as a management consultant, then moved on to work as business development manager, worked as a chief operating officer for an audiovisual company. Also worked, as a project manager for another organization that was into multimedia. So for the most part, I had gained quite a lot of skills, and I was looking, to essentially explore. So when the opportunity came to work at SKLD, one of the first things I noticed in the environment was that there was a very laissez-faire and casual, approach to work. Coming from consulting, work was very intense. When you go to work, you keep grinding until you, impress your line manager, impress your client, and a lot of what you're doing is very mental, so you're putting a lot of mental energy and intensity, and sometimes you're working on weekends. You could come to work on a regular day, and that day you're told you're going to Abuja, and then you just go pack your bag at home and you're heading to Abuja for 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks. So that was the training. So when I got into SKLD and I found, almost a near public sector attitude. I was just like, this is a joke, right? So, and I came in as chief operating officer, so I had leverage in terms of authority. So that gave me the opportunity to start looking at, okay, how do we shape culture here? So the first set of things I did was to, not by pushing people around, but by embodying what I thought was the right attitude to work. I sat at my desk and got things done, did stretch hours, pushed in a lot of effort to see the business grow in certain direction. And for me, the priority at that time was business development.
Okay.
Even though I came as chief operating officer, business development was it for me because I could see that, okay, where the company was, revenues were there, but they weren't exactly growing in the way it should. The prior year, I think we did about 140 million, and then the next year 144. So it seemed like, okay, 4 million in something of that nature. It wasn't too far from that. I can't remember the exact figures, but it was in the 140, 150 range. And so when I came in, one of the things I also observed was that we're over-dependent or over-reliant on a particular client who was contributing close to 15% of our revenue. And I thought, okay, this is a is an institutional weakness
Mm-hmm.
or an organizational weakness,
Mm-hmm.
because if anything happens to this client, we're going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And just as though I was a prophet of doom, that very year, the first year I came in, the company pulled back, or the client pulled back their transaction,
Oh, no.
and we took a hit. So, as a where my first year in SKLD was perhaps the first year SKLD recorded a poorer year than the year before. So it was a welcome to town. It seemed
that must
almost
have
like
been
a letdown, you know, but for me, because I already understood what was driving that experience, I looked beyond the top numbers. I looked at all the other things that were happening. I looked at the fact that this client took a 20 million naira revenue from us, and we still almost did what we did the year before. We contracted by maybe, let's say, 3-5% or something. So I figured, okay, there's an opportunity here. So my first attitude was diversify your client base. So we started growing that. The very next year, after that first year, we moved from, I think, roughly 146 million or so to 250 million the very next year, after we started doing that diversification. And what diversification meant for us in terms of client base now, not diversification of business. We're still going to get to that.
Okay.
What diversification meant for me was look at the markets where you are right now and ask yourself, is it a red ocean or a blue ocean in terms of concentration? Do you have most of the key clients already in your business? So immediately I saw that, most of the key names that you'd hear around in terms of schools were already our clients. I said, okay, let's get out of town. So I took my team, we went to Port Harcourt, we did multiple, call it marketing raids or sales campaigns, and moved around, started engaging schools and all of that. And gradually we opened a lot of new opportunities, and we started doing business with a lot of schools in Port Harcourt, explored Ibadan as well, Southwest generally. Then we started looking at what we had been doing in Abuja that seemed like a concern. So a lot of those things really just helped us to start that journey. So I'll stop at basically the first thing that I observed was there was an opportunity to diversify our client base. And that was my immediate strategy. I also did not wear the traditional hat of, I'm the chief operating officer. I basically focus on operations. I basically looked at what the business needed. And at that time I realized the business needed business development. And the founder CEO was, of course, more inclined to building a very strong operational base for the business. She had done that consistently over the first 13 years of the business before I joined. So I didn't come to duplicate what she was doing. I looked at the gaps and I quickly switched and focused on that, irrespective of what my title was. And that kind of helped us to balance out. So we became a very strong team in terms of operational excellence, and then of course business development, initiatives and activities that helped us to grow.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So I like how you said that the SKLD had a good operational structure before.
Absolutely.
So operation alone gave them a steady increase, but they were crawling in terms of increased CAGR year on year.
Yeah, I mean growth was there, but it was modest. It was modest. It was more organic, than geometric, so to speak.
So to take things from just an organic, an arithmetic progression to like a geometric progression, they need some key business development, some key strategies, amazing. So maybe we can go a little into, what led to, we have diversifying your client base.
Yeah.
So what led also to, and how long in that role,
yeah,
after diversifying your clients, did you start diversifying the business itself?
Interesting. So when I started with the diversification of the client base first, we saw growth. We saw that our B2B business, I started doing decent numbers, because prior to then, the retail was literally almost all of the company. The retail was doing roughly 75% of the revenues. But when I started diversifying the client base along the B2B, getting new educational institutions to do business with us, we saw, of course, that business unit now contributing and literally averaging out. So we started seeing almost a 45%, 40% contribution. So it kind of balanced that, and we had a healthier business. But down the stretch, something happened early that made me start thinking, there is another weakness I can see here. So during 2014 Ebola scare and the crisis and all of that, we observed very quickly that, hey, if schools are shut down for any epidemic or pandemic or whatever kind of communicable disease was out there, it would immediately impact the heart and soul of our business, because we saw very early on that our revenues were concentrated around the back to school months. So you have a business where in the entire 12-month period, 65% of our revenue is coming from only 3 months. 65%. That's between August to October. So I said, okay, this is another weakness. And in 2015, we started looking at how to reimagine our offerings. I immediately started thinking, if we're this vulnerable to a potential, delay in school resumption or a shutdown of school for some months, and it could literally wipe out our business, then we need to start rethinking. So we started that conversation, started first of all looking at our product offerings. Okay, what else can we offer? But it wasn't an easy journey. There were other interesting things that happened between 2015 up until 2018, but I'll quickly just mention a few. 2015, we set up our board, which was a very, very strategic move in terms of helping us with corporate governance. Bringing our board on the table helped us to see the business from new pairs of eyes. They were able to give us angles around macroeconomic issues that we're not aware of, not that we weren't looking out, but you're just not as aware of everything going on around you. We're able to strengthen our understanding of finance. Risk management was also a key value that they brought to the table. We had someone who was at the time head of risk for GT Bank on our board. So a lot of these things helped us to strengthen corporate governance, leadership, management, and then of course there was now accountability at a different level.
Yeah.
So fast forward 2016, we started really pushing Abuja and tried to see how we could establish a regional presence that was very strong in Abuja. All this while we're still focused on, majorly educational supplies and all of that. So we started pushing Abuja. Abuja started doing better in 2016. In 2017, we had already started really, really yearning for diversification of our offerings and our. So there are two lenses that you can look at diversification from. Diversification of the offerings is one, but the real risk was if you're still serving the same sector, even if you diversify your offerings, if something happens to that sector, then you are in that mix or that fix, so to speak. So we started thinking, okay, let's diversify our audience. So the customer segments were, or the sector we're focused on. So in 2017, we had this momentous, totally, uninitiated from within. It wasn't like we initiated it, but for me, again, as a believer, as a Christian, I believe that there's certain thoughts that once you start thinking those thoughts and you really start pondering and meditating on those thoughts, certain things start to align around you that brings those thoughts into fruition. Randomly, I was sitting in my office, I remember, it was Bagada Phase 2 then, it wasn't this office, it was a smaller office. And then some, gentleman came from, an accounting firm, a popular accounting firm, one of the big fours. And they approached us and said, hey, they have been given a mandate to recruit companies who are willing to be vendors for the United Nations. And I said, okay, United Nations. I'm like, anything United Nations sounds like, something bougie and nice and all that. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll be happy to. Who's going to, say no to that kind of? So I said, what will it take? And then they said, you will have to register on the United Nations Global Marketplace. I said, okay, what does that cost? They said, it will cost us maybe about $200 to register there, set up our profile, and then we'll start getting requests for quotes, requests for proposals. I said, okay, is that all? $200? Thank God I wasn't penny wise, pounds foolish. I just said, okay, let's give it a shot. Who knows? You never know. So we registered on the platform maybe around October, I can't remember. No, more like November, December. And in 2018, out of the blues, literally, we received an RFQ for the first time from one of the United Nations affiliated NGOs.
Wow.
And the request for proposal was to provide some materials, for young women and girls, so hygiene materials, basically to take care of whether it was menstrual hygiene or just personal hygiene. And it seemed like all of the things we're already selling to our boarding school students.
Okay.
Buckets, sanitary pads, underwear, soaps, pegs, ropes for, drying your clothes. I was like, okay, this sounds very familiar. This is like, home for us. So we quickly did our market surveys, got the pricing, checked all the requirements, and responded to that RFQ. And we responded wrongly because we're newbies. So we were supposed to submit to the procurement email.
Okay.
But because we're very excited, we submitted to the procurement email quite all right, but we copied the guy who sent us the email. And if you know a bit about that space, because of confidentiality and conflict of interest, the guys who are originating the RFQs are not supposed to see your submissions. You're supposed to go to a separate email. So the guy calls us and I said, you guys are obviously not used to reading instructions. Are you novices? Why didn't you Okay, so I'm going to have to disqualify you. I'm sorry. Maybe next time you do it better. We were like, okay.
Oh, no.
So we're of course very discouraged, but I felt like, look, there's always a first time, and you need to, also give yourself the benefit of the doubt, and So I said, okay, I'm not going to let this slide. I'm going to make an appeal. So I called the guy and said, let's talk. I'm so sorry. This was our first time. We've never, been down this road before, and this is literally our first experience. We'd really, really appreciate if you give us a second chance as resubmitting this. Please find it in your heart to waive this. And he said, okay, I appreciate the fact that you called. I'm going to allow you guys to submit again. And we submitted, and I was thinking, okay, submit again. I mean, it's a competitive bid. Most likely you're going to lose it anyway. And suddenly, somewhere down the stretch, maybe a week or two after that, we got a purchase order from a United Nations affiliated NGO saying you have been awarded a contract to supply X products worth 50 million naira. Up until that time, I think our biggest transaction with any client, which were mostly schools, was about maybe 36 million. And that was really huge. And that was way out. Like most of the average was about 20, 10, 5, 3, 2. So 50 million felt like it was like a bell that was ringing. Like, you guys have just hit something. So, and then came the fact that we're not going to get paid until after we're supplied. So it wasn't that they were going to give us the money. But something was very clear in my mind that this was an opportunity you don't play with. It's the United Nations, for crying out loud. Go figure, because the terms was 30 days net, to get paid. So you finish supplying and then they pay you 30 days after. I was like, forget about it, we'll get it done. So I spoke with my MD, and our interaction was, how are we going to get the funds? I was like, don't worry, I'll figure it out. That's my attitude all the time, really. I mean, I'll figure it out. So I went out, quickly talked to a couple of friends. What we needed to execute the transaction then was about 35 million or so. I got that money together, of course, high interest rates, but it wasn't too high. It was manageable. So we got that transaction executed, and boom, we got paid, and we saw the first, what do you call it now, alert. And I was like, okay, this is, so, when Peter, James, and John were on the mountain with Jesus, and they said, let's build an ark here for Elijah, one for Moses. So that was exactly what we said, let's build an ark here. Like, we're building an ark here, right here. That year, before we wrapped up the year, we had done 250 million in that sector, and we hit our first billion in that particular year.
Compared to the previous year, which was what?
650.
Oh. Whoa.
So we went 1 billion. And for me, what was very interesting also was that 5 years before, because I was year 5 now,
Okay.
when I joined the company, I had said in one of my small meetings, and of course also muttered that to myself personally, that I wanted us to hit 1 billion in the next 5 years. So when that happened, I looked at it, I was like, okay, this is strangely a coincidence. And, I embraced it as providence, and of course the fact that, look, you need to have a vision. The problem with a lot of people, and I maybe switch a bit to trying to speak to our audience, is the fact that many people don't have that audacious goal to say, look, this is what is possible, without, really worrying about the how. I meet a lot of people who are too immersed in the, how will it happen? Don't start having white elephant dreams. One of the popular things I say to my team is, dreaming is free. You don't pay to dream. You sit here, you can dream that you're in the White House right now, you're having lunch with Donald Trump. Nobody's going to charge you for that. Imagine the color of, cutlery, what you're wearing. You can travel in your mind. So that has been, for me, the hallmark of how I approach business. I don't sit around thinking conservative when there's no charge for thinking as big as you want. I think as big as I want. I call whatever number that I feel that my mind can take. You understand? And I don't allow my mind to take the very conservative, safe bet. I don't take safe bets. I think taking safe bets makes the entire adventure totally worthless. Like, you could do that without dreaming. Why are you dreaming about growing by 1%, 2%, 5%? What's the point? Even if you didn't do anything, exchange rate will give you a 5% growth. You understand what I mean? So for me, I don't want to do that. So that's audacious. So that was diversification 101. We diversified into that, like I said, by happenstance. Same 2018, we had another opportunity to represent an international brand by the name Casio. Casio is a Japanese brand. Yeah, it's a calculator brand. Of course, Casio invented calculators, literally. And of course, they have a number of other, electronic products that they've pushed in the market. So they sought us out. It wasn't also us looking for, but we just had diversification on our minds. We wanted to diversify, but it wasn't that we went and said, what do we diversify into? It was we need to diversify, and we kept talking about that. Let's start thinking about ideas. And then the alignment came. So we started representing Casio in 2018. We started distributing their calculators as a primary distributor for Nigeria. And of course, if you know Casio, big brand, multi-billion-dollar company, Japanese origin, but we're largely working with the team in the United Arab Emirates. So that's how we sort of became a 4-business unit company: retail, B2B, education, humanitarian supplies, and distribution of consumer electronics. So 4 business units by end of 2018, from 2 business units in 2017. And then we kept growing.
That's interesting. Sorry, but I mean, they were all, in a way, they were all related to each other. I mean, they could all be used by the same demography.
Yeah,
but I guess
that's true.
I guess my question is more, you let them come to you rather than going to them. Would you advise? I mean, you kept your ears to the ground, fair enough, but at the end of the day, they came to you. So would you rather that strategy or being active about finding markets? What would you advise?
So I believe the journey of building and creating, has many nuances. You set your goals. You set out to achieve, certain things. But what truly holds has something to do with also providence. And when I use providence, I mean God, right? You can say, I want to diversify into this. And then you get into that space and you burn a lot of cash and nothing comes out of it. So how I look at it is, you don't sit back and say, I want to diversify, and your mind is blank.
Okay.
You're thinking a number of things. You have a number of options. For me, because I like to scribble, write, and put my thoughts in, I'm constantly, writing potential things that I want to do. But when I write, I don't fixate on what happens.
Okay.
I'm focused on what I'm doing right now, but I don't fixate on how the things I'm hoping to achieve, I don't fixate on how they happen. And that may not be a strategy that everybody understands. But like I said, based on how things have evolved for me, I'm thinking, okay, these are things that I could do. And when I see one that looks very exciting, I start to build, start to set the building blocks for it. I'm doing my research, I'm interacting with people, I'm telling people, and one of the ways I've grown and that the things I've done have grown is I talk about it. I've often wondered when you hear people say, you want to do something, don't tell anybody, just keep it to your chest. For me, it's never really been true that when I tell people, then I don't achieve it. In fact, most of my biggest, I was just talking to someone yesterday, one of my mentees, I said, most of my biggest, ideas, moments are times when I'm talking to people. That's like when I'm literally creating my mouth. And we're talking, and then the ideas keep expanding, and it gets deeper, and it gets broader, and I get a very good sense of what this can potentially be. So my view, just to answer your question, is when you have a notion or a sense that you need to start going in a certain direction as a business person, start to gather information around that particular area, do your research. What you're doing is you are placing seed thoughts in your subconscious and your consciousness. You're placing those thoughts there, and then as you continue to interact with those thoughts and you're going about your normal business, like I said, things start to align that corresponds with the thoughts that is in your mind. And then when those things start to align, you suddenly have a sense of knowing that this is the direction that you need to now go. That's how it's worked. So you are not overly fixated about, okay, this is what I want to do and I must do it in this particular way. But you start to gather the information, you put all the different thoughts together, and as things start to align, and I can share a lot of stories about how this is so true. I don't want to jump steps, but so like some of the things that we're literally doing today, for instance, some of the things that I'm doing in the edtech space, I started talking about playing in the edtech space in 2018. In 2020, I found myself in Dubai for Christmas, and I was talking to someone who was reintroduced to me, a friend, an old friend, and I've been talking edtech. I'd said to so many people that I'm going to go into the edtech space. Between 2018 and 2020, I made zero moves in terms of anything outward, but just studied the space, looked at any article that had to do edtech. 2020 December, someone reintroduces me to an old friend who was living in Dubai at the time. I went for a totally different reason, to Dubai, and then he got talking. I said, "Hey Tayo, I want to start an edtech firm. I want you to partner with me," and I'm just laughing. And we started in 2021, and the edtech firm is where it is today. You're familiar with that. So those are some of the things that I have seen. It's the same consistent pattern. Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that part, that you're not just sitting down and waiting for the opportunities to come. There's a lot of mental preparation. Your
job is to research. The knowledge gathering is the real work. One of the most influential figures in my life, and of course my pastor, would say, the real business of man is thinking. Thinking is the real business. And that's the activity that most people shy away from the most. Just sitting down and thinking. So the thinking looks like a lazy man's job. You're just thinking, someone will say, 1 ounce of action is better than 10 tons of thinking. That's not quite true, right? It's only when your thinking does not lead to action that is then true. But the reality is that there's no expression in the world that is business related, that is, to the advancement of humanity, that was not first a thought that took hold of the mind of a man or a woman to the point where the person thought, okay, now I can find corresponding action to this thought. So for me, the job of the CEO, if we're talking to CEOs, is thinking. If you're not thinking, your business is dying. Think, keep thinking, keep, ruminating over and over different issues, whether it's process, whether it's opportunities, whether it's scale, whether it's, whatever it is, partnerships, think. And then when you think hard enough, the corresponding information you need, the action, the partnerships, all the different things, they align.
To come together.
And then if you're not laid back or lazy, you're then going to execution. Okay? Yeah.
Amazing, amazing.